any case, I am delighted to welcome you at promptly 5 o'clock. Isn't that impressive? Louise Penny, back to our
Great, excellent.
Are you taking photos for Facebook?
I'm taking a photo for my Facebook post tomorrow. And this is also, I must say, partly is proof to my publisher that I did show up. Back at the hotel eating gummy bears and watching R-rated movies. And if you're here with someone you're not supposed to be with,
boy, that is really a terrible thought. I'm on Facebook at a book signing. How terrible is that?
All right, now if you could turn in this direction, those of you who have the book, my book, preferably.
It's going to be like a wave. Those of you who actually have books, they're wonderful.
All right, here we go. That's perfect.
Ladies, for a couple of you standing up, there are possible places to perch on the other side of the room. Hello, dear. Now, since we didn't catch you all stampeding for cheese, we're going to assume that you will eat cheese afterward, and we'll supply napkins so that your book does not go home with breed, or possibly the Wensleydale. I told them I just couldn't stand it. I tried to do entirely French, but they had a Wensleydale with cranberries that was, I just couldn't pass it up.
Well, we'll call it honorary French.
You think honorary French?
Wensleydale A.
Are there any? Are there we go.
You'd think someone who spent 20 years in radio would know enough to use the microphone.
All right, now.
I'd like to use your microphone.
You can have it. I'll trade. I just need to check with Will. Are we on? Are we live? All right, then I need to start over again by welcoming our live stream audience tonight. When I was talking about us being a media company, I wasn't just kidding. We actually broadcast most of our events now on live stream, and they go global. So it's really very exciting. And I want to welcome those of you who are viewing this event who are unlucky enough not to be here in order to eat cheese and listen to funny stories. This is Labor Day, the 3rd of September, and we are welcoming Louise Penny for her umpteenth. Let me think. How many times has it been now?
I think this is at least 7, maybe 8.
It was only the first book.
I think the first book we missed because I did a tour.
And also because it published first in England, which was really rotten of them, and they sold them all out before I ever even got to read one.
That's true. But you were a huge support before anybody else. You read the British version and liked it. This is before anybody knew that I existed or cared. And you were really one of the first to sit up and make others sit up. And I've never forgotten that. That's huge. I mean, to get the support, and I'm not kidding, Barbara and I are we're old friends and we kid with each other, but that is immense. It is not trivial at all to have any bookseller, but primarily Barbara Peters behind you is it makes or breaks a new author.
I really like that. There was a time when I was a younger bookseller. Considering I started this business when I was 50, I don't think I ever really got to qualify as that. Actually, that was one of the most frustrating things. I got a copy of Still Life from the British publisher, Headline, and I loved it, and I wrote to them, and they said, wow, this is a terrific book. I'd really like to buy a couple hundred of them, and they said, too bad, we only printed, and they're gone.
They only printed like 3 of them or something. It's ridiculous.
It really is annoying when you just can't get them sometimes. I mean, over the years, there have been many books I would love to have sold to you, and the supply side just killed it. So, on the one hand, while digital books could indeed take us down, although those of you who are here, you have to have a rule book, right? She isn't signing the digital book for you. I do think that there are some great advantages in the fact that books that are difficult to
There's
get,
not a publishing run, you're right.
or that disappear.
Yes.
You are fortunate in that all of your backlist remains in print from your publisher, but lots of authors, that is no longer the case, and it's not economically feasible to bring them back. So it's wonderful to at least have an opportunity for you to be able to read early books by authors you discover in a digital form, if that's where it is, right?
That's right. Do you read digital? Do you have an e-reader at all?
No.
No.
And the reason is, I would go blind. I spend all day,
Oh, in front of the
on a
computer
computer,
anyway,
and
right.
the last thing, the absolute last thing I want to do is open up an e-reader in the evening. I can hardly wait to take a physical book, clutch it to my chest,
Well, we got a
take some chocolate, and go to bed.
Someone gave, not me, when Michael used to go on tour with me, he's long since realized that it's not as much fun as it might seem.
He's home in the hotel room.
Yes!
With the jelly babies.
Yes,
and
with the
stuff.
R-rated. No, he's actually back home with the dog. But when he was on tour, someone gave him an e-reader, one of the very, very early ones, as a thank you. And I thought that was really kind. And he downloaded the most ridiculous things. I mean, because he was like a child in a candy store. He was, the history of concrete.
I can tell you that it
dogs
starts
that have-
in Roman times. There is an actual museum of the history of concrete in Dublin, Ireland, where the Book of Kells is. I bet you
Really?
didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Well, now
No,
you do. You can go home and
But I bet
tell
Michael knows. I bet Michael knows about that. But he downloaded all these books, and I think he read a couple of them. But then he tired of it, and he hasn't gone back to the e-reader because he prefers the physical books. I think he takes the e-reader still when we go on vacation, because they're terrific tools. But and I may be fantasizing, living in a wishful thinking world, but I'm hoping, because I'm hearing this from a number of people, that e-readers really are fantastic. They certainly have their place, and certainly for people who are visually impaired or have difficulty reading. For people who travel, they're wonderful. So they are a tool, but they're not necessarily a replacement for a physical book. So I'm hoping that some people will use them as a tool for traveling or whatever, but then go back to reading the paper
I like to
books.
think that people read on both. Sometimes you read on an e-reader, especially like if you can't get the physical book, and sometimes when you're traveling or whatever. And I have some sort of good news. We haven't figured it out yet, but recently the American Bookseller Association has entered into some kind of a deal, which is way beyond my comprehension, with Kobo, in which we are going to be able, assuming Rob and Will are smart enough to figure this out, we may be able to sell ebooks at the store for Kobo readers, which of course isn't terribly useful if you already own a Kindle or a Nook or something, but in case you want to also
that
own a Kobo.
sentence 5 years ago would have been just gobbledygook.
Right.
You can download a Kobo onto your e-reader. At the time you said that to someone 5 years ago, it would have been blah, blah, blah.
How long has it been since Facebook became a verb?
Oh, I know, that's a
I
great,
mean, come on.
like 5 years ago, someone said, do you have,
No, they'll
I don't
say,
think it
I'll
exists.
Facebook you.
Yes.
What the heck would that have been?
and Twitter and tweet.
Or I'll tweet,
Yeah.
and it sounds like you're, like a mockingbird or something.
And I held off Facebook for a long time. I really thought, I held off blogging for a long time, then I did blogging. And I actually quite enjoyed it. I saw it as a diary of my daily life as an author. And sometimes there was something interesting, and often there was something very banal, but I'd still write it because I thought, one day this is all going to be over, and it's a bit of a whirlwind, and it's very exciting, but it can get a little overwhelming, and I forget the details. So one day it'll be really nice to sit back when I'm no longer publishing and read what the first year was like, what it was like to get the first book out, what it was like to go on tour, what it was like to have Michael with me, all those fun things, because I did it for every day for many, many years. And I was very resistant to Facebook. But I've since joined Facebook for a couple of years now, and Facebook is a terrific tool.
I'll never know. That's why we have it. But at the whoop, he just went by, so I can't get him to turn it back on again. We are going to go back, way back to the era of Plain Song. And we might even listen to it again when Will shows up. I'm going to turn it back on again. But I did
Well, you were
bring-
listening to
did.
some of the Plain Song,
and-
the Gregorian chants.
Right, and since your book, The Beautiful Music, takes its title, in fact, from the beauty of this music, and the experience of people listening to it.
Mhm.
Perhaps you'd like to chat a moment about, dropping back a mere millennium or so, about Plainsong.
Well, I'm certainly no expert on it. I had to do a lot of research. I didn't know much about Gregorian chants before I started researching this. It was really, what got me going on it was that we have a monastery quite close to us, and we would go there and take friends there for their 5 o'clock mass, where they sang the Gregorian chants, and they had a few albums out, and they were very successful. And it's a monastery of Benedictine monks. It was very austere and very simple and very peaceful. But to be honest with you, the Gregorian chants didn't really do much for me. I went there because they also sell cheese.
That's the second theme for this
Yes.
evening, right?
They not only sell cheese, I have to tell you, if you ever go to Quebec, you've got to go there. Because they sell cheese, they sell their CDs. But every monastery, probably in the world, but certainly in Quebec, has something that they make. And every monastery in Quebec sends its produce to Saint Benoit du Lac, which is this one monastery, and they have this wonderful store in the basement, looked after by the monks. And it's pies, and it's cheeses, and it's jams, and chocolate-coated blueberries, and it's magnificent. So yes, I went to the chants, and I stood up and sat down and did the whole thing, but in my mind, I'm thinking, when does the store open up again? So then, as research, though, Michael and I went there to the monastery, because I realized that not only did I know very little about Gregorian chants, although I can look it up and do research, and I did, but there's nothing like actually being on site and actually getting a chance to talk to the monks themselves. So I got in touch with the monks at Saint Benoit, all in French, of course, and I explained that I'm a crime writer, and I'm writing a mystery set in a monastery, and I need to do research, and would you mind if I came? Not thinking, these men haven't actually taken a vow of silence, it's more like a strong suggestion of silence. So they really don't like interacting a great deal, so I thought that this was just going to go into the ether and I would never hear back. Well, didn't someone, Brother Raymond, wrote back to say, fine, come on and visit us. And I'm thinking, this is a trap. This can't be for real. Who have I really sent it to? So I wrote back again, saying, well, now I'm sort of trying to talk them out of it. No, you probably don't really understand. I am, and I'm a woman, and I'm a crime writer, and I want to set one in a monastery. Still, wrote back and said, yes, please come. So I think, well, clearly they're fermenting something. I'll show up. And there's a nunnery on the site, so I thought for sure I would be put in the nunnery, and Michael would be the one in the monastery. So I gave him a notebook and a pen. I said, you follow them around, and they know everything they do. Everything. Go into the bathroom, go into the showers, I don't care, do everything. So I guess, okay, dear. Well, we show up, and they actually allow me to stay in the monastery, which I'm stunned. I still can't believe that they allow that. And not only that, but they allowed Michael and I to stay together in the same cell, which is, but it's a wonderful, it's what they call their suite, which is about a millimeter bigger than the other cells. And they call it, and I wish to God, I can't believe I didn't take a photograph of this, because there's actually a plaque outside, and they call it the presidential cell. Tell me we don't all know presidents who probably could have spent some time. The presidential cell. So we stayed there, and we were there for 24 hours, which meant that we saw them perform the Divine Office 8 times, and they sang the Gregorian chants 8 times. And the first time, I'm sort of thinking, looking at my watch, thinking, when is this going to be over? This is torment. Then the next time, this is pretty dull. The third or fourth time, I'm beginning to get into the rhythm of it. And then the very last one, the day of Vespers, and it's dark outside, and by now there's nobody else, no tourists, no other celebrants, nobody, just the monks and us. And of course, the monks are at the front, and Michael and I are in the pews. It's dark, and it's dark out, and there's only 2 lights on in the whole thing, and they're shining on the monks, and they're in their black robes, And it was transformative. I have never had an experience like that. I don't know whether it was a spiritual experience so much as one of a deep, deep peace that I've never known before. We live in the country, and so I thought I knew peace. I sit outside, I sit in the forest, I sit quietly, I do my meditations, but I've never known anything like that. And I'm convinced it was not only the simplicity and austerity of the place and the genuine humility of these monks, but I think it was the music as well, that it finally cracked that veneer that I had around me. And it was absolutely beautiful. And that really helped me in my writing and being able to describe how transporting the music is, not in an external way, but how it manages to transport us deeper into ourselves and perhaps into our real selves. And that's what I try to, I hope I capture in the book.
We should mention perhaps it's unaccompanied, it's a cappella singing.
That's right. It's basically, it's the oldest form of Western music. It existed. In fact, there's a section. Can I read a bit of a section here? Is that all right with you guys?
While you read it, I'm going to go find Will so he can turn it back on again because he's retreated into the back room. Just a moment.
All right, I will read this. Just a sec.
I now need glasses for sure to read. Yes, I know. I can see I'm not the only one.
Well, for the longest time there, I didn't need glasses, and I kept thinking, there's something wrong with me. I should need glasses. So I always think it makes people look smarter. Anyway, here I am, my smart self. This is actually the prologue. It's the first page of the prologue to the Beautiful Mystery, and it gives you some sense of what Gregorian chants are. Hit him. In the early 19th century, the Catholic Church realized it had a problem. Perhaps it must be admitted more than one, but the problem that preoccupied it at that moment had to do with the divine office. These were 8 times in the daily life of a Catholic community when chants were sung. Plain chant, Gregorian chant, simple songs sung by humble monks. Not to put too fine a point on it, the Catholic Church had lost the divine office. The different services throughout a religious day were still performed. What were called Gregorian chants were sung here and there in the odd monastery. But even Rome admitted the chants had strayed so far from the originals that they were considered corrupt, even barbaric, at least in comparison to the elegant and graceful chants of centuries earlier. But one man had a solution. In 1833, a young monk, Dom Prosper, revived the Abbey of Saint-Pierre in Solesmes, France, and made it his mission to bring back to life the original Gregorian chants. But this produced another problem. It turned out, after much investigation by the abbot, that no one knew what the original chants sounded like. There was no written record of the earliest chants. They were so old, more than a millennium, that they predated written music. They were learned by heart, passed down orally after years of study from one monk to another. The chants were simple, but there was power in that very simplicity. The first chants were soothing, contemplative, magnetic. They had such a profound effect on those who sang and heard them that the ancient chants became known as the Beautiful Mystery. The monks believed they were singing the Word of God in the calm, reassuring, hypnotic voice of God.
That's how it begins.
Hang on, and you're going to get to listen to some for a minute without Louise and me talking. It really is beautiful. I can say from my own experience, that I think the most beautiful is if you happen to be, particularly in England, and you hear a voice choir. Because I've heard it in Durham, lots of cathedrals. I've been to all the cathedrals in England. It was something I did years ago. And if you can hear the voice singing in St. Paul's Church, the acoustics in the dome, and you hear those soprano voices singing this, is just, it's a complete knockout. The thing you also have to remember is that in a monastery, the services are conducted, what are they, 9 a day?
8, actually,
8.
yeah.
So this happens all day, it's a regular rhythm, and they get up in the night. And if you've ever been to one of those churches and seen in the monks' stalls, if you ever raise the seat, they have drop-down seats because they stood. And if you raise the seats, they have something called a misericord, which is kind of a half stool that is built on the underside of the seat. It's concealed when it's down, but when you pull it up, so you can kind of like perch your bottom on it and lean against it, because those cathedrals, those buildings were not heated, and they were there in the middle of the night. They were up at 3 and before dawn and so forth, and doing the singing, and physically it was really very challenging. So the carvings on misericords can actually be fabulous. So if you ever go to Europe and have a chance to do that, if you go up into the choir stalls where the monks were, take a look at because they'll raise them for you sometimes, the undersides of the seats, and sometimes it's almost as much fun as the gargoyles. Yeah, whatever. But it is the whole rhythm, really, of life in the monastery.
Yes, that's right. It's like the chants are a microcosm of the greater rhythm of the monastic day. And what I tried to do too in The Beautiful Mystery, what really interested me as well was the issue of the power of music, certainly in my life, and I imagine in most people's lives, that music, we just watched the Olympics. Most of the athletes listen to music before they perform, so that it got them inspired to be stronger, faster, to jump higher. Many warriors, before going into battle, listen to music, the bagpipes, and today they listen to different types of music because it gives them courage. But also when we have broken hearts, what do we listen to? We listen to music. It can reduce us to tears. It can transport us to another time. It can evoke all sorts of emotions. Music is so powerful, and I use it when I'm writing. Every one of my books has a different soundtrack. I listen to different types of music, and I don't mean Gregorian chants. I mean sometimes it's Eminem, and sometimes it's Elvis, and sometimes it's all Adele and some classical music as well, just depending on what it is I need. I'm on flights, I plug into music and I look out the window, and it inspires me. I'm convinced of it, to be more creative than I actually am. I can plug into a part of myself.
There are actually studies that show that learning is enhanced if you listen to Baroque music. Mm-hmm. The rhythms, particularly like Mozart, of Baroque music really can help your brain function better. So I spend most of the day with our classical musical channel on. I really
and I can see the difference.
Enjoy that.
Much smarter this year than you
but it does have a terrific power. And one of the things that I think is interesting, and Louise, you're going to have to forgive me because I have just read so much lately. I'm totally confused. Does your book
Mine was the good book.
Totally true. But is your book also the one that talks about early musical notation, or have I read that in something
else?
The
neumes. Yes. I
right.
talk about neumes. Yeah. Because that was the first.
How to write it down. Which just imagine conceptually how difficult it was to take those sounds and graft them and create notes and
who
so
was the
people
first
can replicate it.
Who was the first person to do that? We still don't really know. I've written about some nameless monk who did it, but up until that was the problem with, and this is true about the Dom Prosper, that they tried to find the first book of neumes because they knew it must exist. And they searched old libraries and old monasteries and Vatican, and nobody could find, and they still haven't actually found the first book of the written chants. But that was what a monk did at some stage, because up till then they were passed down by memory. they were learned by novices. And at some stage, a monk felt that this music was too precious to be entrusted to numbskulls like the novices. So it really should be written down. And he came up with what's called neumes, Neumes. And that was before what we know now, or the round notes and the staffs and stuff.
Right.
Then before that, there were the square notes. You may have seen those. Before the square note, there were neumes. And the neumes, if you see them, they look like wings. And basically, what he did was, in trying to figure out how to write music, was he realized that when he was conducting, they were looking at his hand. So that's what it is. It's a stylized hand, to go up, to go down, to hold, and that's what the neumes are. And so the very first Gregorian chants weren't written with what we call notes, they were written with neumes. And the Gregorian chants became, the square notes became the notes we know now, and they became Lady Gaga, and they became The Sound of Music, and they became, but they're the taproot from which every piece of music we listen today springs.
Very true, and yet we have to realize that we really won't ever know how it did sound, because, it took such a long time. We can't ever really hear what they heard back at the beginning. So here we are, you have gone to a monastery, Gamache gets a call, and it's a schlep to this monastery. I mean, it's by plane.
That's right, it's a little float plane they have to take there, because these monks, what I did was I realized that I couldn't use an existing monastery or an existing order. It just wasn't fair. Certainly on the order, it would be too restrictive for me. So I created a monastery. Being godlike in my powers, I resurrected
A goddess
an
of her
extinct,
universe.
yes,
Here she is.
finally. I resurrected the Gilbertines, who had gone extinct in the Inquisition. Now, extinct is a nice way of putting what happened to the Gilbertines, but they no longer existed after the Inquisition. So in my book, what they did was they escaped the Inquisition, and at the time it happened to coincide with the exploration of the New World. So where else would they go except to the New World, and as far from civilization as they possibly could? And so they went to the edges of the world and set up this monastery. And Gamache is aware of the fact that when he goes in there to investigate the murder, that he will be the first person to enter who will plan to actually leave again. That this is a closed order, no one is allowed in, it's a silent order. So he also has to try to tease the truth out of men who have spent lifetimes in silence, hiding what they think, what they feel. And
So how come they even called in Gamache? Because in point of fact, with a murder there, they could simply have the body into the
yeah,
lake.
that's right.
And that would have been it.
Well,
So-
and he talks about that with the abbot, about why did you do it, and because the abbot just felt it was the right thing to do. But partly also because, the abbot is a wise man. He may very well be a murderer, but he's a wise man, and the thought is that one of them is a murderer. That and they're not equipped to find out who, and that
So,
it is
this
only
is a
right.
really locked monastery murder, in the sense that, well, it is. I mean, it's a variation on a locked room murder because there are only so many people who can be considered suspect. Basically, everybody in the monastery, except the dead man, who isn't a suicide. I mean, I guess that's
No, because it's a murder mystery, not a
Pretty
suicide mystery.
Well, but
Or
I
a tragic accident mystery.
yeah, but I mean, you'd have to establish that the man didn't die by his own hand or by
Yeah.
some evil chance, like falling downstairs or something. So, there's a relatively limited number of people who could have committed the crime, which is always sort of,
That's what I did.
interesting.
You're right. You're absolutely right. It is a variation on, and it's a fairly hoary old tradition in crime fiction of the closed room. Christie was of course a mistress of that, and I'm very aware of that. And I did it partly as a homage to it, but also what I try to do, and I'm not saying I'm all that successful, but what I want to do is I want to take a wonderful literary tradition and put a modern twist on it, a new spin, and make it my own. And that's what I wanted to do with this closed door mystery of literally locked in. I can read another little section, it's only 2 paragraphs, where Gamache first enters the monastery and what his impressions are. Do you mind if I read that section?
It's your program, you do as you like.
So this is, as I say, Gamache being cultured, and he's aware of their music. These monks have, because the monastery is falling apart, they have recorded, done a little home recording of their chants in the hopes that they can sell a few CDs down south and maybe make enough money to just hold the monastery together for another 2 years. Well, unbeknownst to them, they send it south, thinking they're going to sell it to family and friends. Well, it goes viral. And suddenly they become these phenomenons worldwide because these chants really are divine, they're magnificent. And there's all sorts of recordings of Gregorian chants, but there's something special about the voices of Saint-Gilbert entre les loups. And so the world comes calling. But then they double lock the door and they don't want anyone in. And so Gamache is really the first person where the door is unlocked and he's allowed in. Sadly, of course, the key is a dead body. So this is Gamache going into the monastery. The chief wanted to savor this singular moment. With one step, he would become the first non-religious ever to set foot into the monastery of Saint-Gilbert entre les loups. Then Gamache took that step, and the others followed. The door closed behind them with a soft, snug thud. The monk brought up the large key and placed it in the large lock and turned. They were locked in. Armand Gamache had expected to need a few moments to adjust to the dark interior. He hadn't expected that he'd need to adjust to the light. Far from being dim, the interior was luminous. A long, wide corridor of gray stones opened up ahead of them, ending in a closed door at the far end. But what struck the chief, what must have struck every man, every monk who entered those doors for centuries, was the light. The corridor was filled with rainbows. Giddy prisms bouncing off the hard stone walls, pooling on the slate floors. They shifted and merged and separated as though alive. The chief inspector knew his mouth had dropped open, but he didn't care. He had never, in a life of seeing many astonishing things, seen anything quite like this. It was like walking into joy.
First, we have to add that it isn't just Gamache, but Gamache and his team, right? I mean, he's not there functioning
All by
on his
himself.
own.
No, but it is a very small team. It is
It is.
basically Gamache and Beauvoir. And that's, this is really about, most of my books are about duality and conflict, as you know. They're not really about the murder, they're about what the murder dislodges in a community and in ourselves. And so it's the conflict in a apparently harmonious community of the monks between the abbot and the prior. The prior is the leader of the choir. Between the monks who want to do another recording and raise more money and go out into the world and break their vow of silence, and genuinely feeling that this is a gift from God and a sign from God that they need to go into the world and share their gift with the world. And they're serious about that, and that this is a great chance to raise money for the monastery. And the other half of the monastery who feels, no, this is the snake in Eden. This is the voice, the tempting voice. We need to stay with what our vocation was. We need to have humble lives of quiet, peaceful contemplation. That's our job. Both are very compelling and legitimate arguments, but it has created this rift, this terrible war of silence within this monastery, where a raised eyebrow is like a bomb, where a clearing throat is like a gun going off. And this is something that Gamache needs to sort of decode, all of these different ways that they're communicating, but aren't necessarily obvious.
Have we mentioned who the murder victim is? I mean, we find out right away, so it's not giving anything away.
That's true. Yes, it's the choir director. In fact, I think it even mentions it on the fly cover. It's the choir director gets it, which makes it even more, I'm hoping, more interesting.
Now, much as I love Louise, I have concluded reading her last 2 books, and she has a surprisingly dark streak that has come out. We're not, just sort of frolicking in Three Pines. Are you getting darker, or are you looking for more combat? We obviously can't discuss what I'm talking about, but I thought it was kind of an interesting evolution here. Or were
Yes.
you always mean and you just covered it up?
Well, I think if you go back and read Still Life, you'll see that, again, there is the duality. There is the surface delight and beauty of the village, which is intentional, but then there are the darker thoughts and deeds. There's the pain and the sorrow and the loss underneath that, again, is hidden by the veneer of civility. This is actually intentional, and I think you can see J.K. Rowling did it. Many people with series did it, and it's from the beginning. My hope was that there would be something kind of mythical about these books. That Three Pines is an allegory, and Gamache is like a mythical figure. It's one of the great. There are different types of myths, and one is the hero's journey, and in the hero's journey, things don't necessarily go as one would want them to go for the hero. Like you think of Rocky, for instance. He didn't win every fight. He got pummeled, and he kept getting back up, and that's what makes Rocky heroic, and that's what makes Gamache heroic. If everything went his way, that would like Superman, the first version of Superman. He was completely indestructible, and they said that's not a hero. The hero is someone who actually can be destroyed. And that's what we're seeing more and more, challenges to Gamache, and Gamache being brought to his knees and making mistakes and losing things that are precious to him, but getting back up again and keep moving forward. And he's very, very challenged in this, pushed right to the edge where he almost does, well, I won't tell you.
No, we won't. But I wasn't actually thinking of Gamache that you were as hard on as some other people who figure in the books. I mean,
Right,
it isn't
yes.
just Gamache that has hard things to deal with or hard things to face.
No, that's true. But I think of my life, and I'm not. One of the great joys in my life is realizing that I'm no different than anybody else. Like anybody else, I've known joy and I've known sorrow, and I've known them back to back, often at exactly the same moment. I remember being at my mother's funeral and laughing and feeling badly about it, but realizing that that's life. I used to work as a volunteer in palliative care. Never heard so much laughter in my life as I did at palliative care. So that's what I try to bring, and that life is full of joy, but it is also can be very tragic, and I think I find it a little frustrating sometimes. I suspect this isn't true of anyone who's here today, but others who perhaps have fairly rigid ideas of how to slot books in, and a book should be like this, and a book should be like that, and there shouldn't be an evolution or growth, or that a book can't be part cozy and part thriller and part police procedural, part dark and part light, luminous, and the shadow side as well. And I think my life is all of those things. All of our lives are all of those things. I don't see why books shouldn't be as well.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Is this the first book? I mean, we were away at the hotel in a couple books back, but is this the first book in which there's really nothing in Three Pines?
Yeah.
It is. I mean,
Yeah,
Three
exactly.
Pines is just like not in the picture here. We are entirely in the monastery in the far off, edge of the lake and upper, we're in Quebec, right?
Yes.
Upper
Yeah, still in Quebec.
And I thought that was interesting too, because, it should be that way. He has got a broader brief than just the community.
That's absolutely
Did
true.
you enjoy that? Just
I loved-
completely moving away?
I loved going away, and I'm now writing the next book, which is back at Three Pines. And as a result, I love being back in Three Pines. But I realize it for my own self and for the growth and the health of the series. I couldn't set every book in Three Pines. And I really didn't want to, you and I have talked about this before, both privately and I think on the stage, of the dangers of writing series and falling into a formula. And I sure don't want to do it. I think most writers don't want to do it, but it happens by mistake. And I thought there's that danger if I'm writing a certain number of ongoing characters in a set environment. It would be actually quite hard not to fall into, by mistake, this formula. So this was one way to get away from it. It also became fairly clear to me that, in fact, if you probably noticed this, but the early books were called Three Pines Mysteries, and at some stage, the publishers, and we discussed it, the publishers changed it to a Chief Inspector Gamache novel or mystery.
It happens, renaming things. We've had to, as a publisher, we've renamed a couple of our series because they go in directions that you didn't originally envision, especially if the writer goes on. I mean, sometimes, sadly, some people only really have one book in them. I mean, Harper Lee's kind of a classic that way, right? Or Margaret Mitchell or something. But you always assume, you know, when you take on a new author as a publisher, that there will be multiple books, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes they really don't have another story to tell. Sometimes life intervenes. Sometimes illness intervenes. One of my favorite authors who wrote Morgue Mama, I absolutely loved the 3 books by C.R. Corwin, and he died very unexpectedly at a very young age, and that's pretty shattering because, as you all know, when the author dies, the characters, unless of course it's Robert Parker or somebody who here's the franchise, the characters pretty much go into the grave with the author. Remember Kate Ross, who wrote those wonderful Regency books, and my heart broke when she died. I mean, we were just getting going with Julian, and that was it.
Does it sometimes happen, I don't want names or anything, but where someone writes a fabulous first book and then goes on to write other books, but they're never as good, and so it sort of falls a bit apart?
Yeah. Well, we could talk about Thomas Harris and how it went after Silence of the Lambs, or we could talk about The Last Dan Brown, which wasn't even publishable, called The Lost Key, possibly one of the worst books ever written. It wasn't even written. You know, but that tends to be careless, because sometimes when people have had a phenomenal, 2 things happen when an author has had a phenomenal hit. One, the publisher is afraid to criticize or edit the author for fear that the author will be upset and leave the publisher. And the other is it's just not economic, because they're just going to sell. And I've told you this before, where you might have loved early books by an author and then you detect that they've gone seriously downhill. And those are the 2 dynamics going on, is that rarely do they continue to be edited and so forth.
Oh, that's very true. I think we've all read books that are 500, 600 pages, and you're thinking, it would be brilliant if a third of it was taken out.
Yes, that's very true. But there are some people, you know, who really have a great concept, but lots of concepts are not sustainable over a long period of time. And you know, the ones that are the hardest are the humorous mysteries. But it's sort of like, you know, watching a comic on TV. You know, the first year of laughing was hilarious, and then gets a little strained. It's really hard to be funny without upping the game, and then after a while it turns into caricature. You know, they begin to essentially make fun of themselves, and so I think sometimes books that are really hilarious, you know, for 1 or 2, they just don't have enough.
They have a kind of shelf life.
Right, and there's so much pressure to write a series, where in point of fact, lots of times people should just write a book or 2, and then you're done with that, and you should move on to something else.
The problem is, I think it's a little bit like getting drunk, is that you don't really know you've crossed the line till you're like 3 beyond, 1 toke over the line. But the same with writing.
Yeah.
Don't you find that it's sort of, you're looking back and thinking, wow, the last couple of books really stank up the joint, but by then it's too late because they're out there.
Well, yeah, sometimes I think that the pressure on the author is just that the authors run dry and would really like to do something else, but won't necessarily
Yeah.
get a contract you know? and
There's a
so-
lot of fear. You're absolutely right with authors. Particularly this environment today is very difficult, and I think a lot of authors find that the first book or the second book together did really well, and so they themselves self-edit. You know, they don't want to stray from the formula, but then the formula gets formulaic and gets old, and you as a reader don't want to keep reading the same book over and over
You
again.
just heard a whole big deal here about Three Pines. How many people here are going, oh, good, back to Three Pines? Whereas if you said, you know, this time I'm going up the Saguenay, and I'm going to go to Saint Anne de Beaupré and continue this sort of, you know, which is the famous healing center like Lourdes, which is in Quebec and which is an interesting place to go. But you probably wouldn't have gotten the same enthusiasm from those assembled as when you said, I'm going back to Three Pines.
That's
So,
true, but I would imagine, I'm so lucky with my readers in that I imagine that you, I think you'll give me the leeway to go and trust
you
that when
mix
I
it up.
go, that's right, that when I do, you're quite right. And what I am going to do now is every second book will be, and I have done that actually, you're right, the fourth book was set in the inn, but we kept going, we went back to Three Pines. Book 6, Bury Your Dead, was set primarily in Quebec City, but again, there were references back to Three Pines, some scenes back in Three Pines. This is the first one completely away, so I'm going to just sort of mix it up a little bit.
Well, you're really fortunate. I mean, Quebec is enormous. You know, it's a huge province with all kinds of terrain and geography and a very interesting political mix, you know, because there's a whole separatism movement going on, you know, with the French Canadians.
In fact, we're having an election tomorrow
Oh, really?
in Canada, yes, and it looks in Quebec, and it looks like the separatists are going to get back in. It's going to be very close. But, you know, frankly, we've all lived through that before. So, just because the separatists are back in doesn't mean that Quebec is going to separate. You know, it may, but
economically, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But
you know, you're right. It's not it's not rational. It's
No.
completely emotional, which I don't want to say is irrational. It's not. You know, I understand actually the aspirations of the Québécois, but it's not.
Right.
It's not something that is going to ever make sense on a balance sheet.
True, and then there's the Gaspé Peninsula, which is on the south side of the St. Lawrence, in which there are many places where there are no English-speaking residents at all. And since Québécois French is not the French that is spoken in France, I mean, it's a dialect and all. I can remember Rob and I touring through it, and I was somewhat challenged from time to time in trying to, you know, do basic tourist stuff, because,
Because you were speaking French, and they were not understanding.
yeah, but I mean, that's a whole beautiful and huge territory. There are also some gorgeous national parks in Quebec, you know, so you can always do like a, you know,
it's
national
wonderful.
murder. I mean, where is that? I'm trying to remember. There's a particularly gorgeous one with all kinds of heights and ancient trees, and I mean, but you can write forever about Quebec.
You know, that's one, you know, you just hit on, and you and I talked about this again over dinner, about, I love Quebec. I could live anywhere in the world. I have to say, I actually love Scottsdale, Arizona.
Winter in Scottsdale, and then go home
yes.
like other Canadians of
But
our
it gives
acquaintance.
me great joy to describe areas that mean a lot to me. To describe this monastery, and I suspect it's probably like a monastery in many other places, but it's a Quebec monastery, and so I can bring my heart to it. And I can describe the Eastern town. We're doing a film actually of the first book. It's Still Life, yeah.
Who's we? Define we.
Well,
You and Michael and
no, yes,
Cameron?
exactly, yes, and then the Blackberry. You're all the villagers, by the way.
Michael Escavage. Perfect.
That is one of you must die. Sorry.
Volunteers.
Yes, for the sake of art, I'm sure you're willing to do it.
That's terrific. Is it Canadian television?
It is. Well, it's a Canadian production company. I felt very strongly. We had quite a few offers to buy the rights, and I turned them down every year because there seemed a lot to lose and not a great deal to gain, and most of them wanted to buy the rights to the characters and then do like Bones or Dexter and do whatever they wanted with the characters. Well, I went off and, you know, why would I do that? I mean, honestly, these characters mean a lot to me. It's not like, I think of them as being alive. It would be like selling my children. I mean, I couldn't. And who needs, honestly? Anyway, we live out in the country, and my needs as I'm getting older are very small, so I certainly wasn't going to do that. But then this company came, and they approached me, or actually the film agents, and I said no. And then they came again, and I said no again. And then they came a third time. At that stage, I still said no, but I began to pay a little more attention, rather than just the knee-jerk no. And finally, they called me at home, which is extremely unusual, because you normally go through the right channels, and calling someone direct isn't a correct channel. But he called, and he said, so what needs to happen so that, you know, you're feeling comfortable? What's your problem with this, you know, so that we can, besides the obvious problems that you have. And I said, well, it's the characters. I don't trust that anyone is going to get the characters right. And he said, well, would it help if you were one of the executive producers? And I said, yes, that would help. If you gave me some control over this, that would help. So, you know, there was more stuff involved, but I finally said yes to it. I have since learned, in fact, I have the latest version of the script with me. I was sitting up in the hotel room reading it, making notes and stuff. And we're involved in casting now. But I've since learned that being executive producer, at least for me, is quite similar to being Queen of England.
Are you going to leap out of a plane holding on to Daniel's Craig?
Oh, I had that written in the contract.
Yeah, I would sign up right now if I thought I could do that.
Oh no, you know because it sounds good. They give me the crown and everything, but no one's listening to the the gal with the scepter saying, well, what about why do we have vampires? Well, I tell you, sometimes I feel if I didn't go to war with some of the things they sort of floated by, would you mind if it was sort of shot in Calgary? Well, yes. I think so.
Vancouver, where they do all the film breaks, they have these huge sound stages in Vancouver, which has become a real Hollywood
That's right.
kind of city, with tons of stuff being shot up there. But even this, they actually do it in Quebec, right?
Yes, which is costing them money and blah, 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 blah. But, I mean, honestly, what did you think? Was going to happen. So I don't think I'm their favorite person. In fact, I'm meeting with the director on next Sunday when I'm back in Montreal, and I think it's always a little unpleasant because we, again, it's what I was talking about, that duality. We have big smiles on our faces, and always and both struggling. It's a real power struggle. It's very. My Canadian distributor, Raincoast. I was telling him the woes of this whole thing. I mean, it's one of those sort of silly woes. It's not the end of the world, I guess. But it can feel like the end of the world when you're engaged. You're in the middle, and it becomes perhaps slightly more important than anything else that's happening in the universe. And he sent me William Goldman's book. He was the one who wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He wrote a bunch of other screenplays and a number of novels as well, books. And one of the things he wrote was Adventures in the Screen Trade. And my publisher sent it to me and with a note saying, it's worse than you think. Oops. And it's hilarious. It's his experiences in Hollywood trying to get a film made.
Well, when you say, are we talking movie or are we talking a TV?
No, it's TV. What we're hoping is each of the books will be a 2-hour film, like Wallander or Sherlock or
So that's actually a lot better than just a single movie.
Oh, much better. And then
Much better.
But the problem is, and why I'm so engaged right now, and I have to say there's some times when I just want to curl up and say I just can't do it anymore. Because part of it is I don't know if I'm right. Because it can't be my book simply transposed to television. Because it's a whole different medium, and it's creative in its own right. And they bring a lot to it. And so it needs to be a film and not a book that's simply being brought to film. So I have to figure out when to fight and when to let go, and I'm not, I think I'm getting a little better at it, but I'm not totally sure, so there's all that. But every decision we make now with the filming of Still Life will of course reverberate through the whole series. I mean, we're not going to change Gamache halfway through. If we get it wrong, we're not going to change Ruth halfway through. We're not going to change the Village of Three Pines. So we're making all those decisions now that will affect us a decade from now. So it's worth the fight, but it does get a little bit tiring, and I try not to cry when I'm in the meetings. I'm a big girl, I'm a big girl, I'm a big girl.
If you guys are interested in this, Kathy Reichs will be here this Saturday. She's the author of the Tempe Brendan series, but also Bones, and she is an executive producer with Bones. And then a week from tomorrow night on Tuesday, the 11th of September, Tess Gerritsen will be here. And Rizzolo and Isles has just been re-upped again. So they have had, I think, in the whole, positive experiences.
Oh, yes, and that's been their decision.
Both of them seem quite happy with it.
And they've gone in a different direction than I wanted to go in, but I think that they have been very happy with, because they're very high quality productions. These, Bones and the Tess
Rizzolo and Isles, yeah. They were happy with the casting. And Craig Johnson was here before Longmire premiered, which is being shot in New Mexico, not Wyoming, which I have some trouble with. And then when he's here...
I'll get it. I'll talk to their producers.
Right. When he gets here next time, we'll be able to ask him, how he feels about it, because they've just signed it up for a second series. But, then if you talk to Robert Parker, had a horrible experience, with Spencer, who was nothing like Spencer. And there have been some, Sarah Paretsky's movie, whatever. There have been some really bad experiences. So you're right that the time to hang tough is here at the origin point, at the origin story, because anything you do wrong now, you can't really recover from.
No,
that's exactly it. And it's a very interesting examination and revelation in terms of as I say, knowing when to let go and trusting that these people, this is what they do. They do not want to make a bad film. They, even more than I do, because it's their money, they want to make the best film possible. Nobody sets out to make a bad film.
No, but I think mystery series do. Any of you have DirecTV and have watched the international mystery things? I'm telling you what, I am so hooked on Inspector Montalbano. Rob is planning a trip to Switzerland. And we just found one called Fog and Crime with Inspector Soneri, who started out in Ferrara and now he's in Torino. And there's an excellent Swedish one called Maria Vern. This is what we do on Sunday nights when I just can't read anymore. But I'm amazed at the very high quality of these long-running series. I was very happy with the Michael Dibdins when they did 3, although Aurelio Zen was only in Rome once, and they've changed that for purposes of the TV. They're not gypsying about from one Roman city to another. Nevertheless, in general, I find that these, mystery things have done very well as episodic television.
Yes, I think you're right.
Rather than a film, like Drive, for example, which was a very interesting movie, but was never intended to be an episodic mystery. James Salas wrote it as that was before he wrote Driven. And now, before I die, I'm going to make him Drove. I want to call it the conjugated trilogy. I just can't stand it. Drive, Driven, and Drove. How great is that? And I don't know, Michael Connelly hated the Clint Eastwood. I'm going blank. The one with the heart.
Bloodwork.
Sorry? Bloodwork. Thank you. But he really liked the Matthew McConaughey and the Lincoln Lawyer. And I don't know whether Michael will be here on the 26th. He's going to start his tour here and we'll be at the Biltmore. So it's part of Thanksgiving weekend. So if any of you have company coming in or whatever, keep them until the 26th, Monday night. But anyway, it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say about. Now the problem there is that McConaughey is now completely identified as the Lincoln Lawyer in the same way that Ryan Gosling is the driver, right? So if neither of them wants to sign on, that's it. you know, there probably won't be another Lincoln Lawyer movie, and there certainly won't be Driven without either of them. So that presents a problem, sorry?
Tom Clancy did that. He changed characters.
That's true. You went from Harrison Ford.
Well, I
before
guess
that.
you can, and isn't there a new Byrne without, who's it, you know, yeah, but it can be done, but I think it's, you know, it's kind of hard to bring it off when you've got a character who is so identified with a part. But anyway, while Connolly's writing multiple Lincoln Lawyers, Salas never intended to write more than Drive. So that's a different deal, and if you make a movie there, you know, that works out. But when you're writing sequential Gamache,
That's right. You
don't really want a movie.
no, you want exact. This is what I was holding out for.
Right.
If someone had come with a standalone movie, I wouldn't have been interested because I didn't think still life lent itself to that because the characters grow and I wanted to allow that. And we'll see. We're filming in yeah. That's still a good sign that I'm still associating myself with it. When I start talking about their filming, you'll know what's happened.
It's the royal we. I can still hear it. The Queen speaks.
Queen, yes. The beginning of October, but this has now produced a bit of a problem because Still Life is set, as you know, in Canadian Thanksgiving at the height of leaf season.
Which is the middle of October.
Which is-
Canadian Thanksgiving is what, the 15th of October?
Well, no, it's actually this year. It's about the 6th.
Oh,
or so.
okay.
It's BoucherCon weekend actually, which is why I won't be there. But the leaves can change at any time. They can change from mid-September through to mid-October. So, and there's yes, because it's a drought. So I keep getting calls when I was, you know, back home from the producers, and they said millions of dollars on the line, right? And they're in Toronto, and they want to know, like, are the leaves turning? I'm looking out my window.
Paint trees and
Yeah.
stick on paper leaves.
Is this really what it comes down to?
You know, I should mention for those of you interested in this whole territory that BoucherCon, the International Mystery Convention, this year is in Cleveland, but next year is in Albany, New York, which is not very far from. So you can just go right on up and visit Montreal and Quebec.
You're saying, oh, not far from Quebec. Not far, I was thinking not far from. You were saying not far from here. I thought,
No. Cleveland this year.
Those-
But then
the Baroque
Albany.
music really isn't.
And it's the 22nd through the 24th of September, which is a really nice time in 2013. And then, I know this because Rob and I are then taking a leaf cruise from Montreal all the way up to
That's right,
St.
you and I
Lawrence
talked
and
about
around
Yeah.
and down the whole coast and whatever, which I wanted to do. We've done the western one. We've done the Vancouver to Banff on the train,
Good.
which is absolutely fabulous. And I might tell you that the train costs more than the ship. It's the most expensive train I've ever been on, although I have not been on the Orient Express and probably will not because it's just ridiculous. But that we got to Jasper and Lake Louise for Canadian Thanksgiving,
Mhm.
which in fact was around the 15th.
I
And
think it
fabulous.
varies a little
It
bit.
moves around a little bit, yeah.
Yes, it's always somewhere in that.
Right. So anyway, it's fabulous. So if you're interested in Louise's books and you're interested in mystery conventions, you might want to think about going to Albany in 2013, and then you'd have a chance to tour around, see Niagara Falls, see the Thousand Lakes, visit Montreal, do the whole bit, right? You gonna do a tour?
But they've actually done, Quebec Tourism has started up a little tour, a Gamache tour.
What are they using for 3 fines?
Well, what they're trying to do is hit areas that have inspired all the books. So Quebec City and different bookstores or different areas that, as you know, they keep asking me, "Are you sure it doesn't exist?" Yes, it does exist, and I've just been keeping it quiet.
So it appears every 7 years magically
Yes.
like Brigadoon out of the whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but they've done it a couple of times. I'm not sure if they're going to, continue or what the situation is. But a lot of people come up, of course. You're more than welcome to come up. and enjoy our brie.
Montreal is an absolutely fabulous city. It has one of the most beautiful botanical gardens I've ever been in, and a real Japanese garden where they do a real Japanese tea ceremony. Who knew? In the middle of Montreal, but it's absolutely wonderful. And then there's an old wharf district, you know, the old trading district and all, which is absolutely great. Sort of like going to Richmond along the, you know, where they've redeveloped all the warehouses in Richmond, Virginia, and there's the tobacco company and all that good stuff. But Montreal is really a beautiful city.
Thank you. Yes, I love it.
And also very modern.
Yes, yes. Well, it's one of those beautiful cities like that has the juxtaposition of the very old. There's the old Montreal with the cobblestones, and the old churches, and then there's the very modern
And it
city.
was, of course, Mount Royal. I mean, because there was a big hill.
Yes.
A big hill when the French were there called Mount Royal, which has now become shortened up to Montreal.
Montreal, that's right.
Yeah, so it's fabulous. Danny, do you have questions that you would like to ask Louise?
Yes.
Will your film be available on Canadian TV only, or will it be?
She wants to know about whether the film will be available outside of Canada, and yes, definitely. And in fact, here in the States, but the distributors don't know yet which channel it will be available on, but definitely. Yes.
I was wondering if we could just briefly talk about what you have to do to become Ruth as a poet. Will you someday do a small poetry book as Ruth?
Sadly, I would have to do it as Margaret Atwood because she's the one who provides the poetry. And it's not mine. Yes, but thank you. Thank you. I am the worst poet ever. I am like a sullen teenager when I'm writing my life is difficult. Oh, God. Every now and then I forget I don't write poetry, and I try again, but it's still the same
How
track.
did you work out a deal with Margaret Atwood?
Well, first of all, I didn't. In still life, I used her poetry, and then I had to approach her subsequently
Okay,
to
because
use it.
poetry is the single most expensive thing, and music lyrics that you can quote in a book. I'm telling you.
Yeah, it costs a fortune.
It does. It is unbelievably expensive to license those. So
Yeah, it was very scary with particularly with someone who's known like Margaret Atwood, because Still Life was my first, as you know, my first book, and they had a print run of about 2 books. So any profit went to Margaret Atwood for the 2 lines of poetry of hers that I
There were
quoted.
28 because I was able to buy 20.
But yes, so I got the rights and rightly so too, and not just Margaret Atwood, but there are some others. But I love poetry. I was reading the other day a letter from Robert Frost to a friend of his where he describes it. For him, a poem begins as a lump in the throat. And I was thinking that's how I feel about my books, that my books begin as a lump in the throat, as some strongly held emotion that I want to explore. So, yes?
Could you give us an idea who some of the actors are going to be?
Some of the actors, no. I've been sworn to secrecy. I have, and I don't think you're going to be at all disappointed. I know for me, the Gamache he was the first, because everything else is going to be built around him, and we could get everything wrong. Everybody else could be made out of pipe cleaners, but as long as Gamache was, correct. And so we really worked very hard on getting that one right, and I think we did. He's not, to be honest with you, the Gamache that I see in my head when I'm writing, but he is an actor who I think can really embody the qualities that are necessary, and that's more important than physically looking good, but just not being able to carry off the character.
Are you going to do little cameos in each one?
Well, I'm actually going to be, along with Michael and my assistant Lise, who we've now legally changed her name to my assistant Lise.
All one word.
Patent pending. They got in touch with me, the producers, and said, look, we'd like you in some of the bistro scenes, but do you want to get 20 friends, which was really fun. So my family is coming and friends are coming and from all over the place. But one of the great coups that I'm just delighted about, does anybody here listen to them on audio? The books? Ralph Caution, who's just wonderful. So we got in touch with the audio people who do the books, Macmillan Audio in New York, and said, can you send Ralph up for the filming and have him in the bistro scene. So Ralph will be, because he needed to be, because he's just genius. And if he was slightly younger, I would be all over having him as Gamache. But he's a little bit too old now, but it would be wonderful to have him in cameos.
That would be so much fun. Any of you watch the Inspector Morse? You know, Colin Dexter was in every single one of them. But what's wonderful is that he's also in all the Lewises. He's so old now that it's really hard to tell. But he sort of staggers along. You know, he was staggering along the quad and one the other. I always make Rob stop. You know, and go back and he'll say, "What are you?" I said, "Look, it's Colin Dexter." He said, "Where?" You know, this little sort of no-meat creature. But he's still doing it. And I guess there was Hitchcock that really got that going, right? Because Hitchcock wanted to be in every one. So I was thinking that you could take a leaf from Colin Dexter and there'll be Louise in every one.
I know, in 10 years from now, you're going to say, there she was, staggering along. And you will have not changed.
I'm still frozen. Lord, you know, but really, don't you think that'd be fun?
It would be
It's sort of a running
It would be
gag.
very,
You know, there's always look for Louise.
It would be-
She'll be over there doing this.
I'd be the one waving in the background, spoiling the tape. I'm holding up my next book. Yes?
I so enjoy your descriptions of Clara and her art and Peter's art. Have you ever taken any art classes? Are you an artist, or is anyone in your family an artist?
She's wondering about Clara's art and the descriptions of the art and whether I'm an artist or I'm taking classes. No, I'm as good at art as I am at poetry. And again, like poetry, every now and then I forget that I can't draw, and I get out a easel and canvas and, oh, that's pretty awful. I was not raised with art in the family. We had art on the walls, but it wasn't something that we did. We didn't go to galleries. It wasn't part of the family conversation. We talked about music and we talked about literature, but we didn't talk about art. And so I really didn't get introduced to art until I got married to Michael. And his grandfather actually made a living as an artist. He was a portraitist. And Michael loves art and does art as well. So when we traveled, we would go into galleries. And again, I would sort of be rushing through them to get to the gift shop. But then as
Seems to be a constant.
you're noticing that, are you? But as the years went by, I sort of slowed down a little bit and started paying a little bit more attention. And then I would ask Michael, "What are you seeing?" To be fair, I knew and always have known that art would never mean as much to me as it does to Michael. That Michael just connects with art at a level that I will never connect at. So for me, what became the masterpiece wasn't looking at the art, it was looking at Michael looking at the art. Michael became the masterpiece. I could see the joy it gave him and the looks on his face, and so that's what I love now when we go to galleries, is watching Michael watch the art. And in fact, what I describe for the most part in the books I describe the art a little bit, but in broad strokes. What I really describe are the emotions of the people, the effect it has on people, and that I understand. So that's really how that came about. The art is going to be a challenge in the films, of course, too, but we'll get to that later.
By a happy chance, some of the world's best gift shops are in art museums.
I know.
I'm telling you, it's really hard to beat them for, just great stuff, great
Jewelry,
gifts, all kinds of
yes.
things.
Oh, yeah. I know all the great gift shops in the world. The Louvre gift shop, the Mac gift shop.
Can I tell you my art story?
Yes.
You will love this. Well, maybe you won't. But I will tell you anyway. The Cloisters in New York, which is one of my favorite museums, you have to ride the express, to like 195th Street and get off and go through Fort Tryon Park and hike across. It's freezing winter, and I have my 7 or 8-year-old granddaughter with me. So I'm thinking this was a granddaughter trip to New York that we would go to the Cloisters, partly because she'd never seen snow. So I thought that would be a good experience for her, and it was serious news. So we go on the train, we go up the elevator, we slog across the park, we get into the cloisters, and she's not looking terribly fascinated, but she has been to Sunday school, and in the cloisters, which is the medieval art of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or a great part of it, she could figure out the story. So she's looking at the various paintings and she's going, Grandma, you know, look, there's this and there's that, and I'll say she's doing okay. We're having a good time. In the middle of the museum are the unicorn tapestries, which are absolutely beautiful and were woven God knows when, and they are hung around the walls. Tapestries were the original wallpaper. They were, you know, woven primarily for castles in order to keep the wind from whistling through the cracks. So the tapestries were not only decorative, but warm. So they were often cut to fit the rooms. You know, they would weave the tapestries, but then they would like cut around the door, cut around the window or something. Anyway, the tapestries are hung up in this beautiful room. So Mariah comes into the room, and I've been there I don't know how many times. I love the unicorn tapestries. So I'm admiring them, and she's going around, and she's looking very puzzled. She looks around again, she goes around again, and she comes back to me and she says, Grandma, she said, they're hung in the wrong order. The story doesn't go that way. I'm telling you, I almost fell over. And she's absolutely right. They hung them out of order because having been cut, the only way they could make them fit in the room, so that the actual story of the unicorn that lays his head in the lap of the maiden and the whole bit is not sequential. She's 7.
That's remarkable. Oh, that's amazing.
The people in the cloisters thought it was pretty amazing too, because when I pointed that out to them, they all went, "Really?" I
They didn't realize themselves?
honestly, nobody had ever
exciting.
really noticed. Isn't that fascinating?
That's very
So,
exciting.
you know, there's a lot of emotion. I mean, she doesn't,
Yeah.
I mean,
And then she knows
she
that
didn't know
art is
anything about
alive still.
tapestries.
And it's about storytelling.
Exactly,
Wow.
but she really emotionally
Good for her.
reacted
Yes.
to, you know, and she's going around going, the story's not working. And I thought that was great. So you can indeed write about, you know, the emotions
That's right.
of art without really
Without
writing about
having to describe the art
Yes,
itself.
The art. If any of you care about this, Tracy Chevalier wrote one of my all-time favorite books, which is called The Lady and the Unicorn, I think. And it is a brilliant story about the Flemish, I think they're Flemish, weavers of tapestries. And, you know, she's one that wrote The Girl in the Pearl Earring, but to me it never has compared with The Lady and the Unicorn, which we probably have 1 to 0 copies in the bookstore, because that's always the way it is when I decide to sell you a book, we never have any. But honestly, if you're at all interested in that whole bit about, you know, tapestries and storytelling and the craft and all, I think it is brilliant
Yes.
as a novel.
Yeah, I agree. Should we take another question? I wonder if there's one over here or here. Yes.
Your sense of humor creates such
She
a
said you
respite
had
from the heaviness and all of it. How do you work? Do you plan that ahead of time, or does all the anguish and everything overwhelm you too, where you figure, I need a break? Because I've laughed so much in this book,
Oh,
as sad as it is.
I'm glad.
That's a great question.
Yes. She's wondering about the humor in the books, and in this book in particular, but I guess in all of them, and whether it was sort of planned to try to leaven the more stressful parts, or if it just came. I must say most of it just comes. It's not really planned. And again, it was really informed by the laughter at my mother's funeral. You know, that sense of that they really do live and can live side by side. It's, you know, the trick, I think, is to try to make it appropriate, and so that it's not trivializing death, and it's not trivializing what's actually happening, but that it comes again from the human spirit and from hope and some sense of gladness as it mixes in with sorrow. But thank you for that. I'm very happy to hear that it works. Yes.
You have an idea that doesn't really fit Gamache that you might develop into a book, not in a series?
He's wondering whether I have any an idea that may not work with this particular series, and so I might either write a standalone or a different series. No. I have one idea, and I'm writing it all.
Well, you're just not done yet. That's
But
all.
you know, that's not actually true. Well, thank you. Yes, and you know, these characters and the series really does allow me to explore all the things I need to explore. But I actually do have an idea, but I'm not sure, you know, what to do with it, and so it's sort of percolating way at the back. So we'll see whether that might come to the fore at some stage. But yeah, there are a lot of my friends, and you know, a lot of authors do write 2 series at once, or they'll write a standalone. But I'm not very prolific. I can barely get out one a year.
A standalone can be really fascinating though, because everybody's in jeopardy. I mean, you can
That's
take them all down if you
the
want
old
to.
Hamlet. Then
That
they all
really dark
die.
side of you, just decimate the entire cast. No, seriously, I think sometimes the standalone is very liberating in that sense that you don't have to plan,
Mhm.
you know, for
That's a good
continuation.
thought. That's an idea. That's right.
Or at least the Three Pines cookbook.
Or 3 Pines Cookbook as another. You know, I've thought about that. And in fact, we talked about it with the publishers about a possible 3 Pines cookbook. But I couldn't write it, of course, because I'm not. It takes a long time to do good cookbooks. So we'd need to get in touch with an actual.
The food you
Chef.
describe in the book at the
Do you
bistro.
know- Thank you. I love. Do you know what I try to do is make the book sort of sensuous, so that you smell the food, you taste the food, you feel the cold, and then you feel the fireplace, and so trying to sort of break that membrane between being a voyeur as a reader and actually experiencing it yourself. And food is one great way to do that. So thank you.
You know what? That might be a perfect moment for us to quit and point out there's cheese. There's a lot of cheese, and if you don't eat it, I will end up eating it. So it'd be a really good idea if you did that. Will, was there any question or anything that you wanted to introduce? No? In that case, I would like to thank all of you for coming
Yes.
out on Labor Day at
Yes.
5 o'clock. Which has become, this is our 2nd year doing this. It seems to be an ideal day to have Louise come to visit us.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time and all your support, and I'm very aware. You know, at this stage, I don't really have to tour, but there's no way I'm not going to come to see Barbara. And one of the
When you
reasons.
say that, you've got to remember that you want to live to write another book.
Yes. Well, that's it. I mean, I would always come here, but the primary reason is to really be able to look at you and thank you for your support of and embracing like these characters of the 3 Pines, the setting, Quebec. I mean, it could have just sunk from sight. A little mystery set in a little village in a, you know, a fairly anonymous country, and you found it and you embraced them, and then you spread the word, and I'm really grateful. Thank you.
We're really grateful too. Now, working in my car, which I forgot, Will, to unpack, is in fact an arc of Laurie King's